Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine.
I'm Troy Moling, and thank you for joining us this week on Market Journal. Lots to tell you about on today's show. Real quick though, I do want to mention, as the United States and global health officials continue to address the spread of COVID-19, UNL is also monitoring the situation. Updates can be found at covid19.unl.edu and on the Market Journal website. And beginning today's broadcast, as the COVID-19 pandemic continues, more and more industries are feeling the squeeze of the disease. That's especially true for animal producers in food production industries, leaving many farmers with more questions than answers. This week, Market Journal's Bill Dodd caught up with UNL livestock market analyst Elliott to get answers to some frequently asked questions when it comes to the meat packing supply chain.
One of the biggest questions I've heard people asking lately is, why or how are we seeing a meat supply shortage? In short, many producers with market-ready animals are finding that there is limited to no hook space left for their livestock in many meat processing facilities around the country. This problem is causing significant bottlenecks in the supply chain, and some of these problems are stemming from packing plants diligently creating safer work conditions for their employees.
So that's what's really causing a lot of this, what we hear about bottlenecks or meat supply shortage. It's either workers feeling afraid that maybe their safety isn't being taken care of by the packing plants. Some of that worry is whether they are at greater risk for receiving COVID-19. And so packing plants are trying to shut down for a little bit, implement physical distancing measures that are in line with CDC recommendations. Since they're closed, we're not able to process a lot of those animals. And so that's why a lot of market-ready animals are being forced to stay on the farm, and why we're seeing some of the issue or some concerns that maybe we won't have meat supply in the future. Roughly, we have about 10 to 12 days of meat supply on hand in what we call cold storage. And so when people are talking through what does this look like for meat supply in the future, we're really looking at anywhere from a 10 to 30 day window if we were to completely shut down the meat supply.
Operating a meatpacking facility is a very costly endeavor. In our current system of meat processing, the larger the packing plant, the more efficient and cost-effective it is to get those supplies to consumers. However, with a number of larger packing plants slowing down or coming to a standstill in many areas, smaller meat lockers are quickly becoming overwhelmed with orders.
Fixed costs and overhead required to run a packing plant, it's enormous. And so one of the ways that it's more profitable for businesses is to expand what we call economies of scale, which basically means that as we grow larger, our cost per unit goes down. And so there's a great economic and financial incentives for operations to get larger and larger. What happens is if we have geographically clustering of plants being closed, then what happens is we don't have enough capacity to harvest animals. Now, we still have small lockers, as you were mentioning. There are not enough small lockers in the US in order to compensate and fill, let's say, the lack of capacity for even the largest packing plant that goes down. And so when these packing plants go down and there's uncertainty about the future, about whether there's going to be packing plant space, then a lot of these small lockers get flooded with orders. And I've been hearing is a lot of these lockers are booked out through the end of the year already.
So, in our current situation, how should producers be reacting? Elliott tells me with the recent string of events that have plagued many livestock producers over the last year, from the bomb cyclone to the Tyson packing plant fire, and now COVID-19, the biggest issue that has been brought to the forefront through this series of unfortunate events is the need to manage price risk in a much more aggressive manner.
And so as we start thinking about the future, about what our operations look like, I think I would just really encourage each producer to think through, as hard as it is right now, to think through what does my price risk management strategy look like moving forward? can I find a way to manage risk a little bit more? And my personal feeling as I've kind of look at things is that this need to manage price is going to be increasing in the future. And that things like COVID-19 or bomb cyclones, or I think we could name 1,000 different scenarios, are going to probably be more common moving forward. And so we need to find ways to manage price and really protect profit is essentially what we're doing. Find a price where we can lock in profits and move forward. The Ag Econ department here at UNL are willing to help producers, think through that. We have what's called our Nebraska Financial Strong program here, which basically helps farm and ranches plan both, different investment scenarios. Does it plan different marketing scenarios? And if we're looking at setting up cash flow budgets, or we're looking at how are we going to pay for things, or how does a certain marketing plan impact profitability? That's something that we'd encourage people to go to farm.unl.edu and kind of look at the Nebraska Financial Strong services there.
While the damage done by COVID-19 to many industries around the world remains to be seen, the current toll has already been a steep one on many ag producers. In trying times such as these, Elliott tells me one important thing to remember is the fact that you're not alone and you don't have to face your troubles alone. The best thing you can do if you're feeling overwhelmed in your current situation is to reach out for help and simply talk about your problems.
Sometimes it's just a matter of just getting it out there and talking about it that's the most difficult. And as we do that, we're able to work through some of those issues and even just find the necessary resources that we need, and that it's okay to recognize that we can't do everything by ourselves, and that it's okay to reach out for help, and that there's people who are there willing and able to help us. So I just encourage anyone who feels like they're under, even if they don't feel like they're under stress, but particularly those people who really feel like they're having to make tough decisions about maybe farm succession, maybe profitability. Some people might be facing losing generational farms or ranches. Those are not only emotional, but they're very, taxing, and even, a sort of a sense of self maybe feels like is being lost. And so to reach out to help, and I think the rural response hotline is just one of the many resources out there that can help us transition through some of those difficult times in our lives.
As this ever-evolving issue continues to be assessed and addressed, one thing is certain. More and more questions will inevitably arise, and we'll keep looking for answers. Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Bill Dodd.
Thanks, Bill. For anyone interested in the Nebraska Strong financial services that Elliott mentioned, we've added a link for more info on the Market Journal website. And we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the market side of livestock now with Mississippi State University Livestock Economist Josh Maples. He joined me on Tuesday to go over some things that are making news this week. He can offer a professional and a personal look at the current market environment because his family runs a cow-calf operation. To start off the interview, he gave some background on the operation and explained some things he's watching for during all the market instability.
So, I grew up in North Alabama on a cow-calf operation. We also have some poultry houses, we ran some poultry houses when I was a kid. Cattle operation, small by Nebraska standards, but plenty to keep us busy. My great-granddad actually bought the first cattle in the 1930s, and we've been trying to make it work ever since. So my family's still there. Of course, I live in Mississippi now, so I'm not involved in the day-to-day. But it's certainly not a requirement that you came from a livestock background to be a livestock economist, but I can tell you it's definitely helped me in terms of understanding our industry better and being able to connect with producers.
And how has the COVID-19 pandemic specifically impacted how your family's day-to-day operation is working?
It really, we do mostly spring calving. So, fall, looking at sales in the fall. So we haven't seen I think we're like a lot of producers around the country where, we're kind of, the realization in terms of price impact will be later this year. So we've certainly are watching that and trying to figure out what kind of strategies we might need to consider when sales times comes around. But right now it's more just kind of paying attention and analyzing what our best best bet might be moving forward. But we're collecting market information just like everybody else is.
I know that a lot of not only cow-calf operations, but other cattle producers, the prices have pushed their margins just below break-even territory for a lot of them. So what advice do you have on ways that producers can make money in this current environment?
Yeah, I wish I had a great answer for you, Troy. I mean, the unfortunate reality is that COVID-19 has or will impact every cattle producer during 2020. We've gone from a time of coming into this year, we thought 2020 was going to be a pretty good year for cattle prices. We're actually thinking that we might be on offense a little bit, and that has changed quickly to playing defense for most of the year. Mm-hmm. For cow-calf producers, like we talked about earlier, the impact really may not be realized until this fall, depending on each individual operation and when most of the sales happen. For the stocker and feedlot sector or feeder sector, normally we would think about the tough times kind of closing out as we roll through this group of cattle that was bought at pre-COVID prices and into a group of cattle that was bought, after the COVID-19 impact on the market, so bought at lower prices. But of course, we're not in normal times, right? I mean, we've seen that those cattle are not getting moved as quickly, and so we're having to hold on to cattle that were purchased at higher prices prior to COVID-19 for longer than we anticipated due to the logjam of the processing sector, backing cattle up in feedlots and also backing them up out into the country.
And you're talking about selling cattle. Is that even possible to do right now? Can you get a good number to sell anything? Do you just need to wait it out? Is it too late? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that is a very individual choice or individual operation choice. And right now, the most important thing, or one of the most important things always, and it kind of exposes itself even more now, is managing the cost at the operation. So there's significant risk right now on whether you decide to hold cattle longer to try to wait out a better price or try to sell now and accept what you know is a low price. But selling now would be a low price, but you would be saving those additional costs that it would take to hold them longer. And depending on what your feed situation is, whether you still have some grass, depending on where you are in the country, or what your low cost feed source is, that is the big consideration. What would it cost me to hold these cattle longer to try to get a better price? And there's still just a ton of uncertainty about when that better price might happen.
Okay, let's check out some of the numbers for a minute. So slaughter numbers continuing to increase, definitely good news. Maybe not so much for the cattle, but good news for the markets anyway. Just a huge backlog of fed cattle to work through though. So what do these next few weeks look like to you?
What we hope it looks like is continual recovery in processing numbers, right? So if we looked at last week, just under 500,000 head is the estimate. This would be up from that, 439,000 head, hopefully was the low point a couple of weeks ago. So we've seen 2 weeks of improvement. Now I looked at the daily data or the daily estimates that came out yesterday. We were up 8,000 head yesterday compared to last Monday. So hopefully we're on a good trend here of continuing processing numbers, and that we can ramp up and start working through that backlog of cattle that you're talking about, Troy.
And finally today, we're taping this interview before Friday's Cattle and Feed Report. So maybe for the folks watching at home, maybe as soon as the show's done, you can go check out that report online, take a look at the report. So what's the big story with the report this week? What do people need to be looking for?
Sure, this report could be all over the board. I mean, there's we're certainly looking at another report of sharply lower placements. How sharply lower is the question? There's a big range in expectations of how low placements are going to be. And there's more variability or uncertainty on the marketing number than usual too, given what's happening at the processing sector. So this is not going to be a report to just ignore. This is going to be one worth watching because there's uncertainty on all the major numbers. I do think that we're going to end up with a lower cattle on feed number as compared to a year ago. So I think that this report has the potential to tell us a lot about what the flow of cattle did during April, and also kind of hopefully set the stage a little bit for knowing what the next couple of months are going to look like as well.
Next week, we'll be joined by DTN's Todd Holtman. So if you have a question that you'd like for me to ask him, email us or get in touch on social media, and I'll pass your question along. Moving along, and while some rural areas may be tempted to believe they are isolated from the COVID-19 pandemic and similar future outbreaks, there are two facts that make rural areas more susceptible to the most frightening aspects of the virus spread. The average age in rural areas is often over 60 years old, and rural hospitals generally are smaller and lack the capacity for a huge influx of patients needing intensive care facilities and health care at the same time. In the Maine, Nebraska Farmer, read about the challenges faced by Nebraska's rural hospitals and the critical role they play in current and future outbreaks. Time now for weather with Nebraska Extension Ag Climatologist and Market Journal Chief Meteorologist Al Dutcher. And Al, as May continues to roll along, planting is way ahead of schedule on many fronts. Thanks to some nice weather, what's the forecast for the week?
Well, Troy, we've seen some very good planting weather due to the drier and the normal conditions. The temperatures haven't been as conducive. We've been below normal, but simply because of the speed that this crop has went in, we've kind of offset those conditions. The moisture to get things rapidly going. We've seen some of that move across the state over the last couple of days. Eastern Nebraska has been stuck in the clouds most of the week due to that cutoff upper low that hit the Great Lakes with all the flooding and sitting over the southeast. That's being cleared out, and now we're in store for a trough moving across the western United States into the Central Plains, setting us up for widespread precipitation. So we're going to go to the upper air models and see how this is all going to play out over the next 7 days. Today's upper air pattern features that big trough over the northern Rockies, extending all the way down into the desert southwest. Ahead of it, we're seeing stuff move out of the southwestern United States into the more northeast. At this lower surface, we have a low at northwestern portions of Kansas, feeding up that moisture that is responsible for the precipitation overnight. And we'll see a renewed shot of thunderstorms during the afternoon, particularly severe across northern Nebraska. By tomorrow, the trough starts to open up somewhat, makes movement toward the western plains. Low pressure develops over the Texas Panhandle, and we also see low pressure up in eastern Dakotas. Therefore, expect scattered shower and thunderstorm activity throughout most of the plains region. And as we get into Monday, we'll start to see that upper air pattern start to split off from the northern stream across the southern stream. And therefore, here we're caught in between both systems. Most of the moisture will move to our north or just slightly toward our south, with the best chance of precipitation Monday being across extreme southeastern Nebraska. By Tuesday, we see the zonal flow across the northern plains and also that cutoff upper low situating itself down across the southern plains. Under this system, we'll basically be caught between the two parameters, in a drier pattern with mostly heavy precipitation well to our south. By Wednesday, that low is expected to start drifting slightly toward the west-northwest. Therefore, we'll see low pressure that develops into the Nebraska Panhandle begin to try to move across the state. It might touch off a few showers in south-central, southeast Nebraska on the northern periphery of this upper air low. We're expected to be overall dry. On Thursday, a trough starts to dig toward the Great Lakes in the northern stream, but that upper air low starts to move, as according to the GFS, back toward the Texas Panhandle. That may actually induce some moisture feed up into south-central, southeast Nebraska interaction with that northern stream trough, touching off some shower activity across the state. By Friday, we start to see the northern stream carving out a trough across the Great Lakes. Therefore, high pressure starts settling into the northern plains, and we start to push the weather pattern toward the south and the east, potentially very dry conditions in the northwest, and some potential moisture across southeast Nebraska. If this low doesn't perform as expected and moves eastward, much of the precipitation forecasted in the Thursday, Friday timeframe will likely remain to our east and our southeast. As we can see from next Tuesday to the following Tuesday, we're looking at above normal temperatures across eastern United States, below normal across much of the central United States of the Rockies. And in terms of precipitation, drier the conditions across the northern plains, above normal across the southern plains, and most is associated with that upper air low pressure system. So Troy, overall, a wet pattern this weekend, drying out as it progresses, most moisture moving toward the southeast, and then we look at another system potentially next week that will impact us.
Thanks, Al. Next up, contrary to its name, the wheat stem sawfly is actually a small wasp. But regardless of the name, there are new management practices to control it, which work better than insecticides. Market Journal's Maddie McIntosh has more.
Nebraska Extension entomologist Dr. Jeff Bradshaw has been studying the wheat stem sawfly's life cycle. He says understanding its seasonal schedule can lead to better management practices.
So their life cycle is when the adults emerge from their pupation chambers in wheat stubble in May, they'll start laying eggs right away. So like other wasps, these sawflies can lay infertile eggs that'll actually develop into sawflies. So as soon as they start emerging in May, they'll start depositing eggs in grass stems. So they really prefer those cool season grasses that can be really abundant in the western part of our state. They'll lay eggs and then the larvae will develop through the summer into July. And those larvae will start to pupate as they move down in the grass stems. And typically in a wheat field, you might start seeing cutting, which is the sawfly finishes its pupation chamber. It cuts the base of the wheat stem. And so that typically is going to start to appear, those symptomologies will appear in first week, second week of July.
Dr. Bradshaw has found that most insecticides don't work, and the ones that do require weekly applications, which is not economically feasible for wheat producers.
There are resistant wheats that are called solid stem wheats, or they have a pith expression that's solid throughout the stem of the wheat plant. Those can be really effective, but they're not really well adapted yet for Nebraska. And so we've looked at a couple other strategies to get us by in the meantime. One of those has been tillage. What we've looked at was a spring application of a disc in fallow to try to disturb that fallow, maybe roll it over, because those sawflies are overwintering in that wheat residue right on the soil surface. And we think the action of a disc moving through the field actually turns those pupation chambers over. So instead of pointing up, the wheat stubble is now pointing down. And so in those studies, we've seen even a single pass with a disc in the spring can significantly reduce sawfly emergence from fallow. And so alternatively, what we've also looked at, we noticed there were some areas where there were parasitoids that attacked the wheat stem sawfly, and in really significant numbers, to the point where some fields in some years had about 95% mortality of the wheat stem sawfly in our sampling area. So that's when we started looking out in the landscape around these wheat fields. Some of the other cool season grasses that we have in our rangeland and CRP, and even some of our ditches or borrow pits on the roadsides. And so we found that there were some wheat grasses in particular that seemed to be really good hosts for the wheat stem sawfly, but they were also really good hosts for the parasitoid.
These management practices might not work for every farm, and growers may need to reach out to their counties for help.
One size rarely fits all, particularly when it comes to pest management, but it could also be creative things that might come down to working with counties and mowing schedules. So we know that there's a life cycle, and we're understanding more about that through this study we've been conducting on these parasitoids. So, in some ways it might happen at the grower level to make those decisions, but maybe it may come at the county level as well, and trying to coordinate activities that are happening in these landscapes around our wheat fields.
Reporting for Market Journal, I'm Maddie McIntosh.
For more information on the wheat stem sawfly, check out the Market Journal website. Finally today, and continuing with the wheat theme, according to the latest USDA Crop Progress Report, wheat in Nebraska is rated 67% good to excellent, with 5% of the wheat headed. We recently spoke with Nebraska Extension plant pathologist Dr. Stephen Wegulo. He says diseases like Fusarium head blight, stripe rust, and leaf rust are things to watch out for.
And so if we get sufficient rainfall in the coming week to 2 weeks, the risk of Fusarium head blight may increase. The other diseases that we are likely to see are stripe rust, which has been confirmed in Kansas, and we are very likely to see it here in Nebraska in the coming weeks. The current cool weather is very favorable for stripe rust, but it's not here in Nebraska yet. Leaf rust is another disease that we expect to see, but it comes later in the season when it warms up. We usually see it in June, but there has been little leaf rust in the southern states. So I expect that we may not see as much leaf rust as stripe rust here in Nebraska. The one disease that can be devastating is Fusarium head blight or scab. So if Fusarium head blight occurs, it tends to be really devastating to growers in terms of the yield reduction and then the vomitoxin that also comes with it.
In terms of managing Fusarium head blight, Dr. Wegulo recommends timing fungicide application to coincide with the flowering stage.
So from now on, most wheat is at the flag leaf stage or boot stage. And then if there is a lot of rainfall before flowering, consider applying a fungicide. And you can actually go from early flowering to up to 6 or 7 days later and still apply a fungicide and get effective control. So the window of application is a little bit wider than before when it was just at flowering. The fungicides we recommend for Fusarium head blight are Rosaro, Caramba, and Meravis S. Those three are the ones that we have found the most effective on the Fusarium head blight.
Dr. Wegulo says Nebraska is also likely to see bacterial streak and black chaff. This is a bacterial disease that's transmitted through the seed. You may even want to use a Fusarium risk assessment tool to aid in your field scouting. That can be found at wheatscab.psu.edu. That's going to do it for this week's show. Remember, if you missed a story, be sure to download the Market Journal mobile app and follow us on social media to join in on the conversation. And don't forget, you can get the latest updates on the coronavirus outbreak at covid19.unl.edu. Hope to see you right back here next time. I'm Troy Moling. Thanks for watching.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.